Are we live?
I believe we are.
Great. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this session, How to Spend 100 Million. So in June, the biggest 5 operators and members of the Betting and Gaming Council confirms they will provide £100 million worth of funding to Gamble Aware to improve treatment services. This is, of course, a huge amount of money and very welcome news for the sector. This morning's panel will discuss the most effective ways to spend this huge amount of money to achieve its biggest impact. And we all talk about how we approach, as we approach a government review of the Gambling Act, are we getting it right when it comes to RET? So firstly, to introduce the panel, I'll introduce myself as the moderator. My name is Daniel Bliss. I'm Head of External Affairs at the charity YGAM. I joined earlier this year, and I joined from the Gambling Commission. And I don't know about the rest of the panelists, but when I agreed to do this panel, I thought it was in Barcelona. So it's a bit different now, but we have a great panel, superb guests, and I'm sure it's going to be a really, really interesting 40 minutes. So first we have Paul Buck. Paul is Chief Executive of Epic Risk Management, who are a leading independent gambling harm prevention consultancy, which specialise in harm minimisation programs, training, advisory, consultancy, education and awareness in the 6 highest risk sectors across the UK, Europe, and they're doing a lot of work now in the USA. Morning, Paul.
Morning, Dan.
We then have Minal, who is founder of the Recover Me app. This is a new app, a mobile health app aimed at the treatment of gambling addiction. Minal is also working as a junior doctor. Morning, Minal.
Morning, Daniel. Thank you for having me.
And thirdly, we have Martin Leica, who is Director of Regulatory Affairs at GVC, who of course own brands such as Ladbroke Coral, and they are of course one of those big 5 members of the BGC who have put forward this huge amount of money. So morning, everybody.
Morning, Dan.
Good morning,
everybody.
And I hope you're well, and I hope you're pretending you're in Barcelona. But no cocktails. So let's get stuck in. So, the 100 million at the moment, you'll have seen the news reports, he's been directed towards treatment service. But I think through this panel, we can sort of expand that and talk about the RET system as a whole as well, and decide actually, where do you think the most effective way, what is the most effective way to spend this? So let's kick off with the first question in terms of splitting that 100 million through the RET system in search of research, education, treatment. Where would you go? And we'll start with Paul.
Thanks, Dan. I think, first of all, it's a very positive move that there's a much greater investment into research, prevention and treatment, or research, education and treatment, how it's looked at. I think that's a very positive. I think it's overdue, but I think it's very positive, and it's a good sign of intent from the industry. I think the important thing here for me is getting around the logic of why the full 100 million would go to treatment. We know at the moment there's only a very small percentage who present themselves for treatment, ranging around 3% to 6%, depending on where you look. And I think by investing it purely into treatment, all we're probably doing is creating an environment going forward where we get more and more people falling off the edge of a cliff, and at least have got somewhere to be treated if that amount of money has been invested. So for me, I don't think it's the right model to put 100% into treatment. I would personally, if you ask me for figures, I would personally go for maybe 60% into treatment, 20% into research, 20% into prevention and education.
Yeah, which tends, I think, is sort of how the figures are looking at the moment. And Martin, from your perspective?
Good morning again, everybody. Thanks for having me. I don't necessarily feel like being in Barcelona, despite all sorts of mental exercises. And as always, being on a panel with such great panelists as Paul and Minal and I haven't met yet, but Paul has a great and very powerful life story, and Minal's a junior doctor makes me feel ashamed of being a gambling lawyer. but perhaps I will consider career change. But to finally answer your question, well, first of all, I absolutely agree that additional funds, it's the right thing to do. Additional funds needs to be spent on responsible gambling as such. I agree with Paul's point that definitely not all of the funds that have been committed should go to treatment. At the risk of stating the very obvious, all these exercises need to start with prevention and crucially education, something as hopefully many people many people who are listening to us right now will know Paul and I have been doing together, in particular in the US. I'm not going to offer or venture a split, but as I've said, I believe that the split needs to be more balanced than just whack it all on treatment. More money needs to be spent on treatment, not only in the UK, many other countries. That's sort of been the poor sister or poor relative of prevention, research, and education in the last few years. But at the same time, it can't be the case that the other relatives that so far have been better funded would lose that funding.
Sure, great. And I suppose you just both talked about treatment, and we've everyone sort of agrees actually treatment out of all is probably the focus. So let's start with treatment. And looking at the current system, I'd be interested to get your thoughts on how it stands at the moment and where the improvements need to come. Where does the investment need to go in the treatment area? And we'll start with Manal, as somebody who's sort of fairly new to the sector, but actually has come in with sort of a new approach to treatment in the form of an app. Manal, where would you like to see investment?
So thank you, Daniel, for having me. I think that's a really interesting question for me and from our perspective, because like you mentioned, I'm very new to the industry and I'm coming in with quite a different background as well. With regards to treatment, I think the NHS and this general drive actually to support gambling, those suffering with a gambling addiction, is definitely a lot better. We've seen it with the NHS Forward Review, highlighting the number of clinics that are coming across the country. We've got 2 up in the north already. We've seen it with the Gam Care helpline, increasing their hours. So I think there's a real sort of drive to support gambling, those suffering with a gambling addiction. But I think we also need to sort of evolve with times. And from my perspective, technology is very much embedded within our society. I think we are very reliant on it at the moment, and I think going forward that's going to be a definite trend. So actually, looking at incorporating technology in how we address the sort of landscape for treatment provision is very important in my eyes. I think we do it for a lot of other mental health conditions very well. For depression and anxiety, we have a stepwise approach. We can offer a technological solution, and then if that's not effective, we can then sort of move on to more intensive face-to-face either counselling or CBT. So I think going forward, what we really need to be investing in is we need to continue investing in solutions that already work, so the ones that I've already mentioned, but we also need to be looking at innovative and disruptive technology that could potentially change the landscape, because we'll be offering choice to those suffering. They have the ability to access treatment in a different way, and they might respond slightly differently, but we can also sort of facilitate pathways into treatment. So yeah, that, from my perspective, I think the integration of current services is really important, and sort of looking to see how we can embrace technology, like Recover Me, for example, is something that we could focus our energies on.
Yeah, I'd just be interested in, you just touch on sort of your approach with the app. What sort of response have you had, since you've set up sort of the last 2 years? What response have you had to this form of treatment?
So it's been very widely accepted. So for us, it was really important to engage with users quite early on. So when we developed the app, we set up a small advisory group based up in the north, and we asked the question as to whether this would be a tool that would be beneficial to those suffering. And they reached out, and 100% of our advisors actually said yes. We offer a number of different sort of strategies within the app, and all of them did see real benefit from it. And then having spoken to people within the industry, other treatment providers, those that work in education and prevention, there's been a real sort of interest and consideration to actually take this on board. So overall, it's been really positive, actually.
Great, super. And Paul, you primarily work in sort of the education sector. You've been in the sector for a while now, and you're aware of what treatment services are out there. Where would you focus investment?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question because I think the world is changing. I think the gambling world is changing, but also just generally the world is changing. And, I obviously went through treatment myself 7 or 8 years ago after a pretty serious sort of pathological gambling disorder. And different things worked for different parts of my recovery. And I think the thing to remember with this is it's not a one-size-fits-all addiction. There isn't a magic set of pills you can take around on your education programs with you and sort of give everybody one and say, if you have a gambling addiction or somebody suffers it, give them this pill and they'll be fine. Because different people have different triggers, different people have different reasons why they gambled in the first place, and different people will need different things to be able to recover and have a positive life going forward. So for me, I think it's just a real increase in investment in treatment across the board. I mean, there's some fantastic treatment facilities out there at the moment, such as Gordon Moody, Dr. Henrietta Bowden-Jones and Dr. Matthew Gaskell's clinics, which are expanding and bringing the NHS into the arena. But I also agree with Minal that we need to embrace technology, I think, either as part of the process or a big part of the process. And, something like Recover Me that Minal's doing, which is the kind of online CBT. There's Anonymind, which is a kind of online platform with psychotherapists and psychologists. Embracing technology will mean a much greater number of people, or a much greater percentage of people, will be able to access treatment 24/7 in exactly the same way as they can access gambling 24/7 now. So I'm a big believer in expanding the great stuff that's already going on, but also really embracing technology so that a greater number, that 3% gets up to 10%, 20%, 30% and beyond going forward in the future.
Yeah, great. And Martin, anything to add?
I do believe that both Minal and Paul touched upon the critical points, i.e. the need to embrace technology and also, crucially, the need to disseminate the right and correct information that people can rely on to, if there's still a chance to do that, help themselves at the initial stage before they might require professional help. If I may perhaps introduce, in the same vein, introduce two additional themes to this. Because and the first one being the obvious one, and that's COVID. Unfortunately, it's still rambling and raging on. Of course, that may mean now, of course, with the newly introduced restrictions on gatherings, it will get, by implication and by definition, much more difficult to, for example, attend group sessions where people can discuss or have the opportunity to discuss about their problem gambling and other related issues. So to have an app on your phone is a massive advantage. And the other point I was going to make relates to the stigmatization of both, well, the gambling industry, but that's not what we're here to talk about today, but also gambling addiction and problem gambling as a phenomenon. And I reckon that embracing technology, having apps, having phone lines, the bottom line being having anonymized methods of obtaining the relevant information, but also having opportunities to talk to the professionals in a way that makes sure that I will not be stigmatized for going and trying to resolve my problem will ultimately be extremely, extremely helpful, because there are a lot of people out there who, for very good reasons, are not prepared to share that they have this problem, and at the same time they will be able to resolve or try to resolve this by electronic means, because they will simply feel much more comfortable with it. It will give them the chance to do something about their gambling problem. Whereas if they had to force themselves to attend sort of a gambler's anonymous session, for example, they may not like it, they may not get the most out of it, and unfortunately their problem might be developing further. So completely with Minal and Paul in this regard.
Yeah, and Paul touched on it as well. You know, one of the big things that we do need to change is that very low number of people who actually seek treatment. And how do we do that, Paul? There are various different methods we've touched on and embracing digital, but how do you think we do increase that number of people seeking treatment?
No, and I think this is really, really crucial, Daniel. I think for me there are probably three things. And I think Martin's just touched on one of them there in terms of stigma. You know, there is an environment now in this country, and I'm sure around Europe, and we're seeing more and more in America now, where people are prepared to talk about mental health, prepared to talk about depression, prepared to talk about anxiety, which is a very positive move, because these were obviously huge issues and still are huge issues, but there seems to be more of an acceptance to talk about them. There is almost the environment where people are prepared to talk about alcohol and drug addictions more than they would do about a gambling addiction. It's almost more accepted that you would have a gambling or an alcohol or a drug addiction, which is interesting in many ways. You know, there's still a huge stigma attached to gambling addiction. It's still seen as a weakness. It's still seen as something that people feel embarrassed about to come and talk about and say. And there's a growing lived experience or experts by experience movement, which is beginning to happen now, which is part of that is to get people talking about it more and to come out and talk about it more. I also think, a good example of that is we do a lot of work in elite sport. We're quite happy to go on this call now and tell you that we work with Chelsea, Arsenal and Man City. Those three clubs are quite prepared to let us say that, but we go out there, we see this as a big issue and we want to be educated and talk about it. We've got three other Premier League teams who will not let us talk about it because it's seen as a weakness within the club. And these are all sort of just signs of stigma. And I think we've got to reduce that stigma for the first thing. The second thing is to educate more. And that's not just education in schools, where, thankfully there's some good organisations now who are starting to educate in schools. That should always be evidence-led. But we need to do that. But we need to educate further than that. We need to educate in advertisements. We need to have public health campaigns around it. So we need to make sure that more and more people are getting that message that it's okay to talk about it, that if you've got a gambling issue, you're not the only person in the world who's got that, or the first person in the world who's got that. It's okay to talk about it. And I know we'll talk about education more going forward. But the third thing is signposting. I think we need to signpost better. We've got some good treatment organisations in the country, certainly in the UK and Europe. And I think, it's sometimes difficult to find them. So I think that signposting of using technology and other means is really important as well. So for me, Daniel, absolutely crucial, and those would be the three things: reduce stigma, increase education, increase signposting.
Yeah, right. And again, we will touch on education in a minute. I mean, I'd just like to talk to you about again how we get people to seek treatment and really touch on your experiences, especially sort of how when people are seeing GPs, how do we transfer those conversations into actually directing them to treatment?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, like Paul's touched on a variety of good points, actually, things that I've noticed myself having just come in to the sector quite recently. With regards to GPs, I think in terms of medical awareness, so that's GPs, that's psychiatrists, just generally, there is a lack of awareness. And most GPs and psychiatrists will tell you that when it comes to directing individuals to appropriate help, they don't have any training. They don't have any sort of idea, really, other than dealing with sometimes the consequences of those gambling addictions, which is a shame. And I think there is recently a sort of a primary care hub that's trying to change that. And that's great news. And the fact that we've got NHS-led clinics coming up across the country, I think that will have a massive impact too. But what we need to be looking at is when do we screen people when they sort of present to a GP? we talk about alcohol, we ask about smoking, but we never really explore financial difficulties. So that's definitely something that is, an area of improvement in the healthcare service. I think the other things in terms of improving accessibility is, firstly, yes, the biggest barrier to treatment we've noticed is the stigma associated. So really promoting tools that protect the identity of an individual and ensure confidential help, whether that's self-help tools online, the helplines that we have access to, applications on our phone, whatever that may be, we really need to be promoting that. And I think, like Paul touched on, with education will come awareness, and hopefully this addiction will be destigmatized. But until we get to that stage, we can be sort of pushing these tools and increasing accessibility sort of across the treatment provision side of things. So, the statistic that we've been told is about 80% of people have access to a smartphone, and a smartphone will enable you to access, the helplines, the self-help tools on a number of really good charity websites and also applications. So we should be doing that. But also, integration of services is something that we noticed to be lacking. I think the treatment providers in the UK are excellent. We've got so many different opportunities. Like we've got the rehab programs, we've got the counselling, we've got the CBT, we've got such a host of organisations. But trying to work more collaboratively, I think, would really benefit, because then organisations that aren't able to offer support to an individual because of the severity of their addiction could then direct an individual to an alternative organisation. And I think that would really help with the percentage of people seeking help, because then they'll actually see successful outcomes with dealing with their addiction.
Great. Okay, great. So, and moving on to the other areas of the RET system, education is widely agreed that education is an effective way to prevent gambling-related harm. And there are there's a lot going on in this space. But thinking forward, what sort of behaviour changes are we looking to achieve through education? And actually, how do we do this? What's the most effective way of doing this? And I suppose, Paul, if we start with you, through your experiences with Epic as well, and where would you focus on?
I think for me, the crucial thing with education, whichever route you look into, when people think of education, they think just of schools education, which is a crucial and important part of it, of course. To stop that next generation having a kind of boom of gambling problems is crucially important. But I think education is wider than just that as well. And I think the key phrases we always talk about when we talk about education is allow people to make informed choices or to make informed decisions, so that they can go in, they can gamble, which is a legal entertainment. It's a legal sector. It's not like drug taking or something like that. It's a legal entertainment, but most people can stay in control of. But for those people who can't, it's important we have the treatment available, which we've just talked about, but we've got to stop that number growing, that number of people who have gambling problems. And that's where education is so important. So if you look at gambling now compared to what it used to be when I was gambling mainly in the 90s and the 2000s, it's very, very different. It's now 24/7. It's now anonymous. It's not something where you have to go and pay in cash in his shop between 9 and 5 anymore, like when I started out. It's very much in there every day. And I think Minal said 80% have got access to a smartphone now. That means that 80% of the population have got access to a gambling account in about 12 seconds. But I think it's really important that education allows people to make better informed decisions. Now, there has to be responsibility on the operator as well, in terms of advertisements, in terms of products, in terms of all that side of it as well, absolutely. But let's educate people so that they can go, they can gamble, and understand what gambling addiction starts to feel like, or if it starts to get out of control in time or money. And really, it's if you just touch on schools education for a minute, in a PSHE curriculum, they will cover, and have traditionally always covered, an enormous amount of topics like sex, bullying, stranger danger, alcohol, drugs, all these different things. But gambling's never been on that curriculum. Yet kids have obviously got much more access to gambling now, or see a lot more of gambling in terms of sport, in terms of other elements as well, on social media and things like that. So education of school kids incredibly important. At Epic, we concentrate mainly on 14 to 21-year-olds. That's because we use lived experience at the heart of it, and that's because some of the stories are quite hard-hitting. and we don't think they're appropriate for anything below that. I know other organisations like yours, Dan, you'll deal with a younger age group as well, and it'll be a more structured sort of trainer and resource type education. I think all of these have got a place and are important, and I think allowing the kids to make these informed decisions as they go through their teens and they get to gambling age and start to gamble, but they're making informed decisions and can see what getting out of control might feel like. So I think it's that joint responsibility. But I also think there's a bigger education piece, and that is around, corporates, working in universities, the education and messages that the industry can give out as well with their safer gambling campaigns as well. I think education is a much wider thing than is currently being discussed about. But for me, it's all about informed decisions. It's allowing players, gamblers, kids once they get to 18, or 16 with some national lottery products, they are able to make informed decisions. They understand that gambling is an activity that has some risk attached to it, and they're aware of those risks as they go in and do it. If they're aware of those risks, it's much less likely they'll go over that invisible line into gambling problems and addiction.
Great. And Martin, to come to you, where do you see education going? And actually, Paul touched on it. There is now, lived experience and expert experience is becoming a big part of education, and that seems to be the way forward. And do you agree it's a good, strong core of the education moving forward?
Absolutely. Perhaps to kick the answer off with a more general point, the operators definitely have the ability, but crucially also not only the legal, but moral liability and responsibility to educate not only their customers, but the public at large, be it on their own websites, be it through their programs, such as are changing for the better. And needless to say that education is one of the key pillars. We've been working quite closely with both of your organizations, and my view is that the respective work that you guys have been doing is absolutely fantastic, and has certainly further raised awareness about the problem. All of us talked about the stigma still associated with gambling and betting. And personally, I said, and I appreciate that the purpose of this panel is sort of do a bit of shoehorning or pigeonholing, if you will, and go through the individual subtopics one by one. But from my perspective, this is about a process. And the process starts by realizing and admitting to oneself, but also within the industry, what the problem is, what the scope is, and then go on to try to identify how it could be tackled and ideally resolved, what resources need to be spent. And once these foundations have been laid, then that's the crucial bit. Act upon the premises that we have and will have established, and try to change or try to resolve the issues by all the means that we've been discussing here. Prevention, treatment, further education. From personal experience, I of course don't do all the calls that the guys in Paul's team do, in particular in the States, because that's what I've been working with them on. But I can see that at the beginning, the potential partners can be a little bit mistrustful, in the sense that they may believe that we will be talking to them about how to bet, how to gamble. And at the same time, they may not be aware or cognizant even of the size of the problem they may be facing. And then the Epic team have a great, in this case, US-focused presentation that just gives much better flavor of the size of the problem. And then the approach of the potential partners completely changes. You can see it reflected in their faces, because they would just go, all right, well, we knew that there was this novelty thing called legalized sports betting, and we realized that it it was coming associated with certain potential issues, but now we understand the scope and the magnitude of it much better. So yes, we definitely do want to talk to you. And the reason I'm telling you the whole story is that, in my view, this is the right approach. Tackle the problem head on and take a lead on showing how it can be dealt with, and hopefully how it can be resolved, be it by means of technology we've discussed on this call, crucially life experience and all the other forms of information and experience accumulated within the industry and beyond over the years.
Yep. And Paul, do you want to just build on that in terms of the role of lived experience in the education programs as well?
I think it won't come as a surprise to probably most people listening that we put lived experience at the heart of everything. That since day one. Epic came from my own lived experience of a decade-long pretty serious addiction, and a very firm belief that we should be doing more to stop people getting to the edge of a cliff. And it's a very complex addiction, and I think those who've lived it and those who've been through it, and not just those who've had the addiction, but those around them, the ones who are directly like husbands, wives, kids, real experts by experience, should really be shaping anything to do with education, treatment, or prevention. And I know certainly that happens to a big extent. Didn't always happen. When I set Epic up, it was kind of laughed at that you were going to take these gambling addicts, as they were called, and you were going to put them at the heart of everything, and so on. And it was laughed at in a couple of different conversations. But it's good now that other organisations are now building on that. And you look at YGAM, who I know you now work for. Lee had his own issues with gambling. So did Frankie at Bet No More. There's others now as well. And I think that's really crucial. But that mindset and that experience is really put at the heart of it, not just in education, but also across treatment pathways and also across research. And I think that is starting to happen more. You see these groups with the Gambling Commission now and with Gamble Aware now and a couple of others. So it's great to see that others are catching up, if you like, and really seeing the value of that. And as I've said before, it's not just the kind of structured stuff. There is a real growing and more structured and articulated expert by experience movement. You only have to see on social media that. And, they definitely absolutely have a big part to play as well in terms of, looking at the wider, more holistic picture. So yeah, it won't surprise you, Daniel, but my view is very much lived experience should be the heart of absolutely everything.
Yeah, I agree. I think just quickly, I think we'll touch on just the final category, and that's research. It's a question actually what research is out there and how accurate is the research. So I'd be interested to hear from the panelists on where you think the big gaps are in research, and if you could focus funding on maybe 2 or 3 subjects to on research, where would they go? And we'll start with Martin with that.
I believe it's not necessarily a gap, but I would suggest that for obvious reasons, even most of the research facilities are forced to play catch up with all the fast-paced development within the industry, and that pace can be even beyond vertiginous. So, of course, in this ever-changing, ever-shifting environment, it's absolutely critical to be up to speed with all these developments. At the same time, by nature, research takes time to be conducted, and then good research needs to be based on hard evidence, and then it needs to be peer reviewed. So I reckon that's a challenge that I can imagine, or I know from experience, most, if not all, research facilities are or have been facing, because it's not, the sector is not stagnant, and these developments shift not only the perception of problem gambling or gambling addiction as a phenomenon, but do have an impact on how the industry deals with these issues. So it's, I suppose, not that easy to capture all of this, quickly enough. But everybody's doing their. The final point I was going to make, that, in my view, the best form of both education and treatment based on research would be individualized set of information that can be provided to an individual gambling customer. Because indeed, as Paul already pointed out, Minal as well, it can't be one size fits all. So of course the research needs to be generalized, but it needs to reflect all this. So I reckon that's potentially the struggle the research facilities would have, and the industry is definitely here to support their efforts to keep themselves abreast of all the developments and also provide funding, of course.
I mean, and Paul, any sort of areas you'd like research we focused on quickly before we finish up?
So I guess from my point of view, I think research is massively beneficial. I think it shapes the education programs that we put out, like Martin said, the treatment that we put out. So it's really important to understand, the users better and to collect as sort of a comprehensive, information about them, so we can tailor these programs accordingly. So I think going forward, if we're able to really look at each individual and see, how we can better education programs, how we can better treatment solutions to tailor their needs, I think what we'll end up at the end of it will be, incredible. But that being said, it is a very difficult thing to be able to do. But if we can focus our efforts on that, I think that would be great.
I think from my perspective, Daniel, I was always quite sceptical of research when I was new to this game, because it appeared to me that the research just seemed to be research of old research that never really led to anything. So I was a bit of a research skeptic early on in sort of Epic's process, but I think that mindset has changed dramatically. The actual need for independent research that actually proactively rather than reactively looks at the issues of the changing gambling world is really, really important. And we've got some fantastic relationships now with Harvard, Cambridge, UCFB, and such organizations like that. And I think research is important, but also evaluation is important. Once you've done the research, once you've done the programs and the harm minimization programs to actually try and deal with the issues that the research bring, let's evaluate it. Let's evaluate it quickly, act on the evaluation and improve standards and improve things going forward. In terms of certain areas, I think there needs to be a lot more A/B studies about what works. So, there's a lot of talk at the moment around safer gambling advertisements, safer gambling education programs. I think we need to really be doing full evaluations of what actually works, what actually cuts through and makes the difference that we all want for a safer, sustainable industry. And I think the other area, just to finish off, is around markers of harm. I know there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes with markers of harm, both in terms of money, time, and other areas as well. That's the real key thing. How can we use markers of harm to identify customers earlier who are showing signs of problems and then intervene effectively? So these are the kind of areas around research that I would like to see an emphasis on.
Super. And so to close, I'm going to give everyone 30 seconds to answer the question. How would you spend 100 million? So if we keep it to 30 seconds, that would be great. And we'll start with Manal.
So I think it's crucial going forward that we have a more balanced approach. Like we've discussed today, it can't all go to treatment. We need to better education. We need to better awareness, and consequently, then we might be treating less people. So yeah, a much more balanced approach, I think.
Great. Martin?
That money needs to be spent both sensibly and efficiently with a view to protecting customers' interests in this space.
And Paul?
Back that up completely. For me, it's completely nonsensical that £100 million would go to a treatment infrastructure that wouldn't be able to deal with it. So there needs to be a lot more emphasis on let's prevent people getting to the edge of a cliff in the first place, rather than just treat them once they've fallen off the edge of a cliff.
Excellent. So that's it, guys. A huge thank you to Martin, Manal, and Paul. I hope everybody watching's found it fascinating and an interesting watch. Thanks for your time, guys, and have a great day. Have a good weekend.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Take good care. Bye-bye.
Bye.